The greatest twists in history: soldiers at Chosin Reservoir saved by Candy in November 1950. During the Korean War, the U.S. 1st Marine Division, together with 2 regiments of the U.S. Army, a detachment of British Royal Marines and a contingent of British Royal Marines, and a contingent South Korean troops numbering around 15,000 men in total, confronted a Chinese army of around 120,000, soon found themselves completely surrounded, cut off from their supply lines. They relied upon constant airdrops in order to keep in the fight. As the temperatures plummeted to below -30 degrees Fahrenheit, the situation became more desperate as they were facing down wave after wave of Chinese troops, determined to wipe out the UN forces. Due to the hard fighting, the U.S. Marines quickly ran low on ammunition, particularly 60mm rounds. Calling to be resupplied, radio operators used the code word Tootsie Roll in order to request more of these vital pieces of ordnance. Unfortunately, the Air Force radio operators who received the message didn't have access to the Marine Corps code book and took the request at face value. Cargo planes were loaded with pallets of the chewy, chocolatey candy and were soon on their way to the beleaguered troops at Chosin Reservoir. At first, bewildered and no doubt annoyed by this strange delivery, the Marines and other soldiers there soon found the candy to be an unexpected bonus. With the freezing temperatures, the normal sea rations would be literally frozen solid, making eating them generously described as difficult. When warmed up in the armpit of a soldier, the Tootsie Rolls provided a quick energy boost for the hungry troops. This was exactly why candy was supplied to the military to begin with. The chewy, sugary candy was first given to Marines as far back as the First World War as a convenient source of energy, since it doesn't melt nor break easily like a typical chocolate bar. They were so ubiquitous that during the Second World War, Marines were featured in advertisements for the candy, and Tootsie Rolls continued all the way into the Korean War. In addition to the energy provided, which sustained the hungry troops, the candy had other uses. When thawed, it has the consistency of clay, easily molded into whatever shape desired, and in the frigid temperatures, it would solidify quickly. Because of this, the candy was used to patch bullet holes in jeeps and trucks, hold together fuel lines that had split in the cold, refreezing into a solid mass that held damaged parts together. And there were even reports of Tootsie Rolls being used as makeshift bandages, plugging bullet wounds in injured troops. Looking at the situation, High Command realized that the troops had chosen would be annihilated if they stood and defended the position any longer, and a withdrawal was ordered. As the beleaguered Marines and others fought their way through Chinese lines, there was no shortage of vehicles and soldiers themselves who were held together by candy. It is possible that the tale and the effectiveness of Tootsie Rolls in a combat zone has been exaggerated over the years, but there's no doubt that more than a few of those stationed at Chosin owe their lives to the large supply of the candy. In the aftermath of the battle, the survivors dubbed themselves the Chosin Few, though more than a few gave themselves the nickname Tootsie Roll Marines. It just goes to show that what may seem a mistake can be turned into an unexpected advantage. The Japanese fleet was destroyed by a hunch. After the surprise attack against Pearl Harbor, the American Navy was eager to score a crippling blow against the Japanese fleet. After an indecisive clash at the Battle of the Coral Sea, both navies engaged one another a few months later, contesting control over the small Pacific island of Midway. 4 American carriers launched their planes in an effort to seek out and destroy the equal number of Japanese carriers arrayed against them. On June 4, 1942, the commander of the USS Enterprise Air Group, Lieutenant Clarence Wade McCluskey, was leading a formation of 32 dauntless dive bombers, heading for the location of the Japanese fleet. McCluskey was baffled by the decision to send both torpedo bombers and fighters in separate waves, and his flight had little coordination with the aircraft from other carriers. But he and his men proceeded with the mission anyway. They flew towards the expected coordinates of the enemy, hoping to get the drop on the Japanese. When they reached their destination, however, they found nothing but empty ocean. With no targets in sight, McCluskey began a sweeping search of the area, turning west and then northwest in an attempt to retrace the possible route the Japanese had taken. After miles of fruitless searching, he was resigned to failure and turned his plane and the rest of his formation back to the Enterprise. It was then that the hand of fate intervened. Sailing below them was the unmistakable wake of a ship, which McCluskey thought was a cruiser, though it was later revealed to be the Japanese destroyer Arashi, which had been detached to hunt down the submarine USS Nautilus. It was under full steam and heading directly northwest, back toward the Japanese fleet. On a hunch, McCluskey turned his formation around and used the pointed bow of the Arashi as an arrow. The formation flew directly towards the unprepared Japanese carriers. The American torpedo bombers had arrived first and had made their attack runs, flying low and slow over the waves towards the Japanese carriers, making them easy targets for the enemy fighters and anti-aircraft guns. When McCluskey's dive bombers arrived, the Japanese attention was on the torpedo planes, and many Japanese aircraft had returned to their ships to rearm and refuel. In such a vulnerable position, the bombers made their attack. The Enterprise's bombers concentrated their attack on two of the carriers, the Kaiga and the Akagi, to maximize the damage. Caught off guard, the Japanese ships were struck, causing severe damage. The Kaga and the Akagi were both in flames. And shortly afterwards, another wave of dive bombers from the Yorktown appeared, which targeted the Soryu. All three would sink by the end of the day, leaving only one Japanese carrier. With this decisive blow, momentum shifted firmly to the Americans, and the Japanese would be on the defensive for the rest of the war. McCluskey's hunch and decision to follow the wake of the Japanese destroyer was seen by many as the pivotal moment of the battle. Admiral Chester Nimitz would later state that if he didn't make that decision to keep searching for the Japanese fleet and return home, the war would have lasted another 3 years. When he returned to the Enterprise after the successful mission, McCluskey was amused to find that his plane had been hit 55 times. Just as McCluskey's sharp instincts led to a pivotal victory, you too can make a smart choice for your business with our sponsor Odoo. Their all-in-one platform covers everything from sales and accounting to seamless website creation, helping you steer your business with ease. Odoo's website app really stood out to us. Let me show you just how easy it is to use. All right, here we go. Let's say I want to create a military hardware store. In just a few clicks, I can drag and drop these blocks, edit this text, adjust the colors, add images, and we're done as quick as that. Everything is fully customizable. And then with the ChatGPT integration, I can easily change the tone of my text or rephrase it entirely. Even better, Odoo's first app, like the website app, is completely free to use forever. This includes free support and unlimited hosting. And by clicking our link in the description, you can also claim a 1-year free custom domain. Thanks to Odoo for sponsoring. Now on to an offhand comment destroys the Berlin Wall. Since the end of the Second World War, capitalist and communist nations faced off in the Cold War, with each side vying for supremacy. Arguably, the greatest symbol of this divide in ideology was the Berlin Wall. Germany was divided up between the Soviet Union and the Western powers, and the capital city of Berlin was likewise split between both factions. During the intervening years, a flood of Berliners moved to West Berlin, forcing the communist leadership to erect a physical barrier to stem the tide. In 1961, the Berlin Wall was erected and evolved into a thick concrete barrier to prevent any escape. The wall was heavily guarded, monitored around the clock, and access to the other side of the city carefully controlled. Guards had standing orders to shoot anyone attempting an illegal crossing. Over the intervening decades, East Berliners took incredible risks to escape to freedom in the West, and the wall itself became a symbol of repression and a visible representation of the Iron Curtain that divided the world. Western leaders strongly advocated for the removal of the barrier, the most famous being the U.S. President Ronald Reagan, demanding that Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. The people of East Berlin also wanted the wall torn down with no less fervor. By the 1980s, however, there was some hope. Many communist regimes were in the process of liberalizing, including the glasnost and perestroika programs of the Soviet Union. In late 1989, East Berliners took to the streets en masse, demanding reform. By November, the city's leadership knew it needed to make some concessions or face possible catastrophe. Giving in to popular opinion, restrictions would be loosened on border controls to West Berlin, allowing crossings without prerequisites. Limitations would still be in place, but much more lenient than before. On November 9th, Günter Schabowski, a government spokesman, made the announcement at a press conference after being handed a brief about the new policy, though he didn't have the time to read it himself. When questioned as to when the new policies would be implemented, Schabowski stumbled, saying, "As far as I know, it's effective immediately. It was actually set to begin the next morning." But at that moment, it seemed like a minor oversight. He also failed to mention that passports would still be needed, and other restrictions would still remain in place. The press conference was broadcast on East German television, and soon after the announcement was made, East Berliners poured into the streets to see if they could cross to the west. The guards at the wall had not received any updated instructions, and were shocked to find hundreds, then thousands of citizens massing at the gates, demanding to cross. With no choice and no communication from their superiors, the gates were flung open, and the two halves of the divided city were united once more. West Berliners likewise took to the streets to greet their family members, friends, and fellow countrymen after decades of separation. Some brought picks and sledgehammers and began chipping away at the barrier, and the process of demolishing the Berlin Wall began, all due to an unprepared bureaucrat giving an off-the-cuff remark. The Poison King's plan backfires in the 1st century BC. The Roman Republic was steadily increasing its territory and found itself in a series of heavily contested struggles for control of Asia Minor. Their chief adversary was Mithridates VI, king of Pontus, a prosperous kingdom in the north of Anatolia, Turkey. During the course of his reign, Mithridates devoted his energies towards eliminating Roman presence in the region, including organizing the Asiatic Vespers, a conspiracy in which Roman tax collectors, landowners, and other Italians in Asia would be massacred, as well as several wars in which he faced down Roman legions, led by brilliant generals such as Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Pompey the Great. In spite of some successes, his hope for an Anatolia freed from Roman influence was dashed when, after a successful campaign against the pirates in the Mediterranean, Pompey took over the war effort against Pontus and smashed Mithridates' army. Fleeing to his possessions along the Black Sea, he withdrew to his palace at Penticopim, now Kerch in modern-day Ukraine. Not wanting to be taken prisoner, Mithridates chose to end his own life with the use of poison. Plots and schemes were commonplace in the politics of the ancient world that Mithridates had to be constantly on alert against attempts on his life. This led to a fixation bordering on an obsession with poisons, to such an extent that he earned the nickname of the Poison King. He spent a great deal of time studying poisons, even engaging in a form of early toxicology, poisoning prisoners and criminals and noting their effects. He was also alleged to have created a universal antidote to all known poisons called Mithridateum. Made from over 50 ingredients, they would be ground down into a powder, mixed with honey, and formed into a chewable tablet, which he would ingest regularly to build up a natural resistance to poison. The exact recipe for this panacea has unfortunately been lost to history. It's also believed that he would expose himself to small amounts of poison, such as arsenic and snake venom, to build up a tolerance to their effects, hopefully to frustrate any assassination attempt. So, with Roman armies closing in, Mithridates ingested a large amount of poison, which he kept in his sword hilt. He became severely ill from the substance, but due to his built-up immunity, remained alive. Still alive, the once proud king of Pontus had to beg either a servant or Gallic mercenary to finish him off with a sword. There is some controversy and conjecture as to how deep Mithridates' obsession with poison ran and why his final dose failed. Most of the sources about his life come from the Romans, who perhaps exaggerated his actions for the sake of a more compelling story. Allegedly, Mithridates would publicly ingest poisons as a way to show his cure-all as effective, though this could be an elaborate hoax designed to thwart assassination attempts with harmless substances taking the place of deadly toxins. It's also possible that the final attempt was dose-specific, and it's known that he had shared it with his daughters to prevent their capture. Perhaps there wasn't enough left for the desired result, especially since Mithridates was known to be a robust and powerfully built man, even in his advanced age. Regardless of the reason, history will always remember Mithridates VI of Pontus as the Poison King who failed to poison himself. Frederick the Great, saved by a fan during the course of the 7 Years' War. Prussia, under the leadership of their emperor and brilliant military commander, Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great, had scored stunning victories over their opponents. Though outnumbered, victories at Rosbach and Leuthen cemented Frederick's place as a preeminent military commander in history, admired by later generations, including George Washington and Napoleon Bonaparte. In spite of Frederick's brilliance, by 1762, the situation was dire for Prussia. They faced a major coalition made up of France, Austria, Russia, Saxony, Sweden, and a number of smaller German states, while their allies were the German states of Hanover, Hesse, and Brunswick, and their only non-German ally was Great Britain, who was more concerned about naval affairs and their overseas territory, and provided limited support on the continent. In 1759, Prussian armies were defeated at the decisive Battle of Kunersdorf, a major blow to their war effort. In 1760, the capital of Berlin fell to an Austrian and Russian army, though it was abandoned 3 days later. Exhausted after enduring heavy casualties, surrounded by enemies, and with limited outside support, defeat seemed inevitable. It was then that Prussia received an unexpected reprieve. On January 5, 1762, Tsarina Elizabeth, the ruler of Russia, died at the age of 52. She would be succeeded by her nephew, Peter III. Almost immediately after ascending to the throne, Peter ended the war with Prussia. He gave back several territories that had been captured by Russian forces, and even went as far as to offer an alliance with their former enemy. The reason for this? Peter was a big fan of Frederick. Peter III was born as Karl Peter Ulrich Herzog von Holstein-Gotthard in the northern German city of Kiel, near Prussia, and spent his early years as an admirer of Prussia and its king. When he ascended to the Russian throne, he brought this admiration with him, refusing to take part in any aggressive action against his hero. Without Russia's support, the anti-Prussian coalition fell apart. An event that has since been dubbed the second miracle of the House of Brandenburg. With one of their major rivals now firmly on their side, Frederick managed to stave off what would have almost certainly been a decisive defeat. And in the subsequent peace treaty, Prussia was able to retain territories that would almost certainly have been lost, such as Silesia, which was captured from Austria in a previous conflict. This left Prussia, once on the verge of collapse, as one of the preeminent powers in Europe. For his part, Peter's admiration of all things Prussian did nothing except alienate him from his nation's nobility. Years of struggle left the nearly victorious Russians with nothing to show for their efforts, all due to the love their new leader had with a foreign enemy nation. This, when combined with his other eccentricities, led to Peter's short reign, being overthrown in a palace coup only a few months after taking office. He would be replaced by his wife, another German-born noble, Sophie Frederica Augusta, better known to history as Catherine the Great. These are just a few examples of how unexpected twists in real life are just as dramatic as anything that can be found in a Hollywood script. Did you know that the process of gradually adapting to poisons through exposure is called Mithridatism, after Mithridates? This controversial practice actually works, though only against certain poisons, venoms, and toxins. The immune system can't become resistant to poisons that accumulate in the body, like the majority of heavy metals. Those will cause damage over time. Here's a fun fact. A large part of the world's population practices Mithridatism without even knowing it, as the most common poison we build tolerance to is alcohol. Cheers!